Can you just tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about the Kurds, and then we'll move from
Okay.
there?
Yeah. Okay. Well, they are a distinct ethnicity, and they yeah, you find them in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And yeah, you can see that when the Western powers split up the Ottoman Empire, they obviously, they simply drew lines in the sand, we'll say, and it wasn't to the benefit of the Kurds. The Kurds found themselves in these four different countries, and so they've always had this, yeah, I think quite understandably, have had this nationalist aspiration. They want a Kurdistan, a country for themselves, but also understandably, the countries that in which they find themselves, whether it's Iran, Iraq, Turkey or Syria have always fought these aspirations. In Turkey, it was actually quite violent. There was a civil war, not quite a civil war, but kind of an ongoing terrorist insurrection in eastern Turkey, and it went on for a long time. I don't think it's actually entirely stopped. Occasionally, you hear about a terrorist incident, but I remember back, let's say in the 1980s, that whenever Turkey made it into the news, it was actually because of fighting or some sort of major terrorist attack carried out by the Kurds in eastern Turkey. So they were a real threat, a real headache for the Turks for a long time. And, they still, I guess, pose some kind of threat, as a potential threat. And it's for that reason that Erdogan and the Turkish government in general is not happy about an independent Kurdish force right on their border. And that's what they have in Syria. And I think to some extent too in Iraq. I don't know exactly. It's hard to get information about what's really going on in northwestern Iraq. But there has been sort of if you actually look at Wikipedia or any sort of official source, it describes this Kurdish region in northwestern Iraq as semi-autonomous. But I think it's really more than that. It goes way back, yeah, actually during the years, the pre 9/11 years, when Iraq was under very severe economic sanctions that led to starvation deaths of 500,000 children and an equal number of adults. And then years had followed. Okay, the that Kurdish enclave was always kept separate. It was actually it was not subject to the sanctions. It wasn't bombed because there was a period of actually kind of regular bombing that a lot of people have forgotten about that went on for years and years. It's just that pretty much the Western powers, the U.S. in particular, just declared that they owned Iraqi airspace and they've just felt free to strike different targets within Iraq. But again, this Kurdish enclave was excluded. So, and then to this day, though it's described as semi-autonomous, it was reported that the Israelis actually launched their attack on Iran over that part of Iraq, which tells you that they have a great deal of influence there. And I remember there was some sort of Iranian attack. I really can't remember exactly when it was, but it on Israeli targets, and one of them was right there. So there was some sort of Israeli intelligence center, and I'm sure there are probably several there. So the Israelis have worked closely with them. The Americans work closely there. It's technically Iraqi territory, but it seems like it's maybe only Iraqi territory in name. And then you find something similar, very similar, of course, in eastern Syria. The Americans have been there for a long time, and their occupation of that land contributed greatly to the fall of the Assad government because that's where the Syrian oil is, or the vast majority of it, and where their best agricultural lands were. And they deprived, this country that was already quite poor of these very necessary resources by occupying that land. And they continue to occupy it. And everybody knows, too, that the Israelis are involved there. Again, I don't think they have any military forces, but probably intelligence advisors. They see both of these pieces of land as important to their, ongoing sort of attack or war on Iran. It's through that, again, through these territories that they're able to actually approach the Iranian border because that Kurdish territory in northwestern Iraq has a border with Iran.
Interesting. So, is the reason that the United States and Israel are working with the Kurds and supporting the Kurds is because they're promising them that, hey, after this is all said and done, whatever it is, a wider regional war,
Yeah.
carving up Syria, that we'll be able to make you your own Kurdistan. And so the Kurds, they have these national aspirations, like you said,
Right.
that's one of the most important things for them. So they say, yeah, okay, well, we'll make a deal with the devil, or maybe they don't even view it that way. They say these are our allies. Israel and the U.S. will help, overthrow these other regional powers, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and then we can make our own state. Is that the thinking behind
Yeah.
it?
Well, I'm sure that the Americans haven't stated that openly. They wouldn't because they know that that would raise alarm bells, certainly with Erdogan, and they don't want to do that again. Never forget Turkey is a member of NATO. It, but they probably have led let's put it this way, they simply kind of allowed the Kurds to believe that maybe, that will be the end result of their partnership. But I'm sure they haven't stated that explicitly, openly. They couldn't, that would, again, create some very severe diplomatic problems if they did, again, with Iraq, and with Turkey. Of course, they never cared about Syria or Iran. And then
Right.
Iran, yeah, I would just say that Iran has a number of minority groups, and the Kurds are one of them. And I think there's no question, like the Israelis have tried to work with them because they do whatever they can to subvert, Iranian government authority. But I don't think they've had a whole lot of success with the Kurds. I may be wrong, but when you hear about these attacks or terrorist incidents, and I can't recall one that involved Kurds. So there probably have been some. I just can't recall any. More often, it's Baluchistan, or the Baluchis, which are another minority within Iran.
Baluchis? Are they
Yeah.
from Italy? What's going on here?
No, I don't know anything about them. I'll be honest with you. Don't know anything about them. But the Americans and the Israelis are always looking at some way, some sort of weakness in some chink in the Iranian armor. And you always look, as they have and as they did in Syria, you look to minority groups that maybe have resentments or have nationalist aspirations, and you work with them, and that is a way of weakening central government power.
Mm. Just when I thought I was kind of understanding the region, and then the Syria thing happened, and I just realized, like, man, I just know nothing about this area. You just brought
Yeah.
up Baluchis.
Yeah.
Now we got
Well, it's a
Kurds.
fascinating area. It's the cradle of civilization for the world. And these are the Mesopotamia and eastern Turkey, northern Syria. This is where the earliest cities arose.
Mhm.
And so it has a very, very, long history, and all groups have come and gone, and empires have risen and fallen, and.
Yeah, I would love to travel through there if we just weren't
Yeah.
destroying the whole thing constantly.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just
No,
such
no,
a
it's
shame.
actually,
Like,
yeah.
what an interesting place
Right.
to be able to go travel around and visit. But now we have, I mean, Syria is just chaos right now. I just don't, the future is so uncertain.
Yeah.
We know that it's just going to be bad. That
Yeah.
seems to be the
Right.
end result. But so anyways, is there any other reason that Israel will be working with the Kurds? Because right now, Turkey is coming in, and they seem to be intent on getting rid of the Kurds. I'm wondering if there's some potential flashpoint there, and also
Yeah.
just the
Well,
fact that Syria used to be a buffer zone between Israel and Turkey, but now that's gone, and it seems
yeah.
pretty clear now that HTS was basically kind of extension of Erdogan, Turkey's military. Their terrorist army that they
Yeah.
supported, but it seems like they're taking orders mostly from Turkey. So
Right.
if Israel is moving into Syria, southern Israel, taking the Golan, moving in, and Turkey is kind of controlling Syria to some extent, pushing out the Kurds. I'm wondering, all of a sudden, you have Turkey proxy essentially right up against Israel. And I'm just thinking, can that go badly? I mean,
It could.
obviously it
Yeah,
could, but
yeah, obviously it could. Yeah, no, there is that danger. I, again, they're the two countries have very different objectives, or maybe they're not so different. Okay, I think, first of all, the Israelis, as I've said, they've always wanted to simply wanted a weak and chaotic Syria. They didn't want a unified, strong Syria that resisted them, and their dream came true. They now have a chaotic and weak Syria, and a chaotic and weak Syria doesn't present any kind of threat to them. It severs the link between Iran and Hezbollah. Maybe not 100%. There are obviously ways to get arms and provide support to Hezbollah, but the main route, the main supply route, has been cut, and so it's going to be more difficult. And then it allows them to seize territory. They can always claim, and now that there's not a real army in Syria, certainly not in southern Syria, they can simply seize territory that's valuable to them. And that's what they've done. And then there are, of course, groups within Israel that would actually like to go all the way to Damascus. And then Erdogan made some comment about how Damascus was once part of the Ottoman Empire, and he would like to go there. So there is a potential. I mean, there's at present they're pretty far apart. I think clearly the Israelis and the Americans, and the Americans kind of basically are there because of the Israelis. Let's really be honest. That there was really no reason for them to be opposed to Assad or Hezbollah or so many of these groups in the Middle East if it wasn't for Israel. Israel
right.
really has shaped our foreign policy there. But Israel, I think, clearly wants to maintain its influence in eastern Syria among the Kurds there. First of all, because it is valuable flyover area, though I think now all of Syria probably is because they've taken out the air defense. So that maybe is not so important. But they want a divided Syria. They want to, as long as the Americans are still there and, the Kurds are in control of those resources, Syria will remain impoverished. And I think they would like to keep it that way. I think there's no question about it. Now, Erdogan, again, he does not like this independent Kurdish force on his borders. So I don't know what's happening right now, but in the first several days after the fall of Assad, his proxy army. Okay, he has different kinds of proxy armies there, and HTS is one of them. But kind of like the one that he controls most directly is called, I believe, the Syrian National Army, and it's made up of, I believe, of Turkmen. It's an ethnic group within, obviously very closely related to the Turks, if not just outright Turks, but they actually are Syrian citizens. But he has the most direct control over that army, and they were fighting the Kurds, and they've already taken some territory from them. And he's threatened to move in directly, just send the Turkish army in. I think maybe it was just yesterday, he delivered an ultimatum: either you lay down your arms or, we invade. So we may very well see a Turkish invasion of northeastern Syria. And then there is a potential for direct conflict between Turkey and the U.S.
Well, that would be crazy, right?
Yeah.
Two NATO nations, like what? They both enact Article 5?
Okay, apparently if the fighting takes place like in Syria, it wouldn't have to, because it wouldn't be attack on, neither of them are on their home territory.
Neither of them are supposed to be there.
Exactly. We were an occupying force there in violation of international law. Carrying out a very cruel occupation that just it immiserated the Syrian population. And then the Turks shouldn't be there either. So it's just something. It actually wouldn't be grounds for invoking Article 5.
What a mess. It's crazy. It just seems like everybody that's there right now, that's all the movers, none of them are supposed to be there. We got Israel,
Right.
the US, Turkey all moving
Right.
in, going to carve up Syria. The only people that were supposed to be there were the Russians that were on the invitation of the Assad
Yeah,
government.
and the
And
Iranians.
okay, and the Iranians. But then after the fall of it, it sounded like actually HTS, probably at the behest of Erdogan, was saying, "Hey, don't leave Russia." So Russia's the only one that is so supposedly like kind of being pressured a little bit to stay. But it sounds like they're leaving, right? They're like,
It's
this is
yeah.
a mess. We're out of here,
Right.
right? Is that what you're
Right. Well,
saying?
I
Or
think yeah, they've pulled all their forces back to the bases, and both the air base and the port there, the naval base, and I think a lot of them, actually have already been sent home back to Russia. They're still there, and apparently a decision hasn't been made, but they're talking about. I think if they remain there, it's going to be sort of a skeleton crew. It's not. They're not going to devote major resources, and kind of like a sort of thing that they can abandon at a moment's notice if things start to turn south. They clearly don't want to get, entangled in Syrian politics. I think they're going to do everything they can to prevent that.
yeah, I mean, pulling out. I think the West might look at that as a sign of weakness and like, oh, look at these Russians,
Yeah.
turning tail run. But if they just leave a skeleton crew, I heard something about them trying to turn it into sort of humanitarian centers or something like this, not a military function anymore. Who knows? But if they do pull out, I think that's actually a very good move.
Yeah.
It
It
in
just,
many ways. Well, one, it doesn't get them entangled into something broader, and it's a dangerous place. If you got Turkey there, you got the U.S. there, you got Israel there. It's just not something. It's a powder keg, right? And so just move out. It doesn't seem to provide many strategic interests. I think they're
yeah.
moving some bases to Libya, but also I think even it's kind of the bigger thing that it does is it's kind of showing this is the multipolar way that you don't if a country invites you to be there, then sure, okay, you can go. But you don't get involved in these external conflicts. You stick at home like this is a mess. We don't even know who's in charge. So let's just get out of here.
Yeah,
That's
well,
how
no regime change operations or anything, but in this case, it was the legitimate, government authority in Syria that requested their help, and they provided it and helped the Syrian military to turn the tide against ISIS and against Al Qaeda, and yeah, it ended tragically, but it was initially quite successful.
right. But I think it just the kind of the thinking if you compare the
Yeah.
Russian way and
Right.
the
The Americans
American
would
way.
do. Yeah, there would be tremendous pressure just to stay there.
Right. We would never pull out. We never
Yeah,
do. We just always try to
right.
expand, even though it's to our detriment. We're not
Yeah.
achieving anything. We're just draining money. They're liabilities. These bases. They're just sitting ducks. And I think maybe the West is maybe kind of surprised at kind of the way that Russia behaves. And I think the longer that this goes on, the world can just see these two great powers, the United States and the way it behaves, and Russia. Whatever there's any type of even a potential thought of an attack on the U.S. base that's illegally occupying a country, we'll go crazy. And then there will be terrorist attacks, planes flying into, or drones flying into high-rise buildings in Kazan. And the Russians are just like, okay, we stay calm. We're going to think this. Don't overreact. Don't invade 10 countries, because that's what the U.S. would do.
Right.
And
Oh, yeah, that's of course what we did in response to 9/11. Maybe not 10 countries, but we launched two just astronomically expensive and also
just devastating.
devastating. It shouldn't be forgotten that the Iraq War led to, I believe it was 2 million or 2.5 million refugees. 2.5 million Iraqis fled to other countries, to places like Syria, as a matter of fact, and Turkey and other countries as well. 2 million internally displaced people, and something on the order of 700,000, maybe even a million dead. There are studies that showed just looking at newspaper reports, found 100,000 direct deaths in Iraq as a result of our intervention, our invasion. But as we pointed out in talking about Gaza, there's a figure of something like 45,500 now. That's almost certainly an undercount, but that's just direct deaths. Direct deaths are always just a fraction of the total deaths that result from war. So if you had 100,000 direct deaths in Iraq, it's not at all surprising that you would have 700,000 or even a million total deaths. So yeah, it's just not, let's not forget what happened there. That's actually, I think every once in a while we need to be reminded of the horror, the horrific consequences of that war. And it was response to a terrorist attack, a very, a massive one, a massively successful one, but that had nothing to do with the country that we invaded.
Yeah, it's
we know
it's
that,
crazy.
but I think just every once in a while, again, we need to restate this.
Right.
Because it's
No,
such a huge...
Yeah, I was so young when that happened that I never fully understood it, and I don't have the same kind of perspective that you do because I was just a little kid, and it was when 9/11 happened, it was I saw how everybody, even me, I was like a fifth grade, I don't remember, but we changed the menus to freedom fries and freedom toast, all these things. It was everybody got super patriotic after that, and then we ended up invading countries that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But everybody got along with it. So we just have to remind ourselves of just that risk, that if there is some type of event, and I think Russia is aware of that how the U.S. spin machine, how you can get war fever, drum up your population, and then something disastrous happens. And like you said, 1 million people die, millions displaced, trillions of dollars spent. It's just such a horrific thing. And then when we're talking about a country like Russia or Iran, we're talking about, something that could be 10 times, 100 times. I mean, with Russia, we could talk about the end of the world even. Like, this isn't a game that we should play, but we act like it's a game, it seems like. But it seems like Russia does not. They seem to be very cautious and careful, and they're showing, I think, the world that they have no desire to be a global hegemon. Like they're not trying to hold on to bases and put their pieces on a board like this. The
Right.
U.S. is, and I think
Right.
the U.S. we keep on trying to portray Russia as an imperialist power, and so I think maybe we're surprised that they don't react that way. Like, why aren't they falling for our traps? Because this is how we would react. And
It
I
could
think
be.
the world's starting to see that more and more. And it's just, I think that's just further, strengthening BRICS and leading to the demise of the U.S. empire. And we're just going to, I don't know. I don't know if we'll just fade off into the sunset. It sounds like we're going to go off in the sunset with a big boom. Is what kind of what's
Yeah, that's my fear too.